The sun was setting over New Seoul, casting long shadows across the clean streets of the colony planet Nova Terra. The year was 2187, and humanity had spread across the stars, bringing with them both their greatest achievements and their deepest flaws. Ji-soo Kim walked with careful steps along the sidewalk. Her hand rested on her round belly, now 7 months pregnant with her first child. At 32 years old, Ji-soo was one of the top medical researchers at the Nova Terra Institute, working on cures for diseases that affected both humans and the alien species they now called neighbors in the vast galaxy. Just a few more blocks, she whispered to herself. The lab had kept her late again. Important work, her boss had said, the kind that saved lives across multiple worlds. Ji-soo didn't mind. She loved her work, but her swollen feet reminded her that even the most dedicated scientists needed rest. As she waited at a crossing, the traffic light blinked red. Ji-soo checked her watch. Her husband, Min-ho, would be waiting with dinner. She smiled at the thought and stepped forward when the walk signal appeared. A police cruiser pulled up beside her, its lights flashing but sirens silent. The window rolled down. "Hey, you, stop right there," called the harsh voice. Ji-soo turned, confused. She hadn't done anything wrong. The cruiser door opened, and Officer Derek Mason stepped out. He was tall with a permanent frown etched on his face. His uniform was crisp, but his eyes were hard as he looked at Ji-soo. "You crossed against the light," he said, though Ji-soo knew this wasn't true. "No, sir. The walk signal was on. I waited for it," Ji-soo explained calmly. She'd dealt with Officer Mason before. Everyone in the Black Korean community of New Seoul knew his name and his reputation. Mason moved closer. "Don't argue with me. ID now." Ji-soo reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her citizen card. Mason snatched it from her hand and scanned it with his device. "Ji-soo Kim," he read aloud. "Still hanging around where you don't belong, I see." Ji-soo took a deep breath. "Officer, I live here. I work at the Nova Terra Institute. I'm just walking home." Mason's lip curled. "Yeah, you Black Koreans always have some excuse. Taking jobs from real humans. Breeding like rabbits." His eyes flicked to her pregnant belly with disgust. "Making more problems for the future." A small crowd began to gather at a safe distance. Ji-soo noticed several people had their phones out, recording. Good, she thought. There would be proof this time. "Officer, I'd like to go home now. My husband is waiting. I've done nothing wrong," Ji-soo said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear and anger building in her chest. "Nothing wrong. You people are the problem. Ever since the treaty allowed mixing with aliens and bringing in off-worlders, this colony has gone downhill." Mason spat. "Now we've got your kind everywhere, taking over." Ji-soo felt a flash of anger. She'd been born on Earth, as had her parents and grandparents. Her family had been among the first colonists on Nova Terra. She'd earned her position at the Institute through years of hard work and brilliant research. "May I please have my ID back?" she asked, holding out her hand. Mason held the card away from her. "Maybe I should check if this is even real. Lots of fake IDs in this district." Ji-soo reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I'm going to record this interaction, Officer Mason, for my safety." Mason's face contorted with rage. "Put that away. That's interference with police business." "It's my legal right to record," Ji-soo stated, starting the video function. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. Mason lunged forward, his fist connecting with Ji-soo's face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward. She tried to catch herself but fell, landing hard on her side as she instinctively tried to protect her belly. Gasps and shouts erupted from the onlookers. 2 people rushed forward to help Ji-soo, while others continued recording, their faces shocked at what they'd just witnessed. "Back off," Mason shouted, his hand moving to his weapon. This woman was resisting arrest. A young man in a shop uniform knelt beside Ji-soo. "She's bleeding. Someone call an ambulance." Jisoo touched her face, feeling the warm wetness of blood from her split lip. But her real fear was for her baby. A sharp pain radiated across her abdomen. "My baby," she whispered. "Please, my baby." Mason stood over them, suddenly aware of the many recording devices pointed in his direction. His expression shifted from anger to something more calculated. "She attacked me first," he announced loudly. "I was defending myself." A woman from the crowd stepped forward. "That's a lie. We all saw what happened. You punched a pregnant woman for no reason." "Stay back," Mason ordered, his hand still on his weapon. "This is police business." Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone had called for help. Jisoo closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, trying to stay calm for her baby's sake while the pain inside her grew. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Jisoo lay in bed, her face bruised, a bandage covering the stitches on her lip. Minho sat beside her, holding her hand so tightly his knuckles were white. "The baby is stable," Dr. Park said, looking at the monitors. "But you need complete rest, Jisoo. No work, no stress. The placental abruption was minor, but we need to be careful." Jisoo nodded slightly, wincing at the pain. "Thank you, doctor." After Dr. Park left, Minho's composure finally broke. Tears ran down his face as he pressed Jisoo's hand to his cheek. "I should have been there. I should have picked you up from work," he said, his voice breaking. "It's not your fault," Jisoo whispered. "It's his. Only his." Minho's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and his expression changed. "The videos are everywhere, Jisoo. All over the net. Galaxy-wide. People are outraged." Jisoo closed her eyes. "What about Mason? What's happening to him?" Minho's jaw tightened. "Administrative leave with pay while they investigate." His department released a statement saying there's more to the story than what the videos show. "Of course they did," Jisoo said bitterly. The door to her room opened, and a nurse entered. "Miss Kim, there are reporters outside wanting statements. We've increased security on this floor. Also, you have some visitors, government officials. Should I send them away? You need rest." Jisoo was about to answer when her phone chimed with a specific tone. She knew that sound. It was the emergency line, the one only family could use. "My phone, Minho. Please." Minho handed her the device. Jisoo read the message and, despite her pain, felt a small smile form on her lips. "What is it?" Minho asked. "My brother just found out what happened," Jisoo said. "Ta. Oh." Minho's eyes widened in understanding. The nurse looked confused. "Is that good news?" Jisoo handed the phone back to Minho. "Tell the officials they can come back tomorrow. I need to rest now." She turned to the nurse. "And yes, it's very good news. My brother is coming." After the nurse left, Minho leaned closer. "What did Ta say exactly?" Jisoo closed her eyes. "He said, 'I'm coming home. The peacekeeper will be in orbit by morning. They'll learn what happens when someone touches my family.'" Minho sat back in his chair, a mixture of relief and anticipation on his face. "Officer Mason has no idea who he just messed with, does he?" "No," Jisoo said quietly. "He has absolutely no idea that my brother commands the most powerful battleship in the Galactic Defense Force. But he's going to find out very soon." In his small apartment across town, Officer Derek Mason watched the news reports with growing anxiety. His department had backed him publicly, but his chief had been cold during their meeting. The videos didn't look good. Still, Mason had gotten away with worse before. The system protected its own. His personal device pinged with an alert. It was an automated notification from the orbital defense system that all citizens received when large military vessels entered Novaterra space. "Warning: GDF battleship Peacekeeper entering orbit. Captain Ta Kim commanding." Mason didn't make the connection. He didn't know that the pregnant woman he had assaulted was Jisoo Kim, sister to Captain Ta Kim, war hero, and one of the most decorated officers in the Galactic Defense Force. He would learn soon enough. Captain Ta Kim stood on the bridge of the GDF Peacekeeper, his hands clasped behind his back. At 40 years old, he had the bearing of a man who commanded respect without having to ask for it. The massive battleship hummed with power as it cut through space, heading toward Novaterra at top speed. "Captain, we'll reach Novaterra in 6 hours," said his first officer, Commander Rodriguez. Ta nodded, his face calm but his eyes burning with barely controlled anger. "Thank you, Commander." He turned to look at the main screen, which showed a replay of the video that had reached him 12 hours ago. The image of Officer Mason striking his pregnant sister played again. Tad's jaw tightened. "Sir," Rodriguez said carefully, "the diplomatic court has requested we slow our approach. They say our arrival might disrupt the peace talks with the Centauri delegation." Tay turned to face his officer. "The Centauri will understand. Their culture values family above all else. Tell the diplomatic court I've invoked Article 7 of the military code. Family emergency leave. The Peacekeeper will maintain orbit around Novaterra for the duration of my shore leave." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez replied. She hesitated, then added, "The crew wants you to know we all stand with you, Captain. What happened to your sister? It's unacceptable." Tay's expression softened slightly. "Thank you, Maria. Please inform the crew that I appreciate their support." Alone in his quarters later, Ta stared at the metal case on his wall. The highest honors from Earth, Mars Colony, and 3 alien governments. He remembered the day he earned the Galactic Cross, pulling survivors from the burning space station Harmony after the terrorist attack. 63 lives saved, including the Axorian ambassador's entire family. His communication panel beeped. "Captain, incoming message from Admiral Chen." Tai straightened his uniform. "Put it through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen, her expression grave. "Captain Kim, I've reviewed your emergency leave request. Normally, I would deny using a battleship for personal transport, but given the circumstances and your record of service, I'm approving it." "Thank you, Admiral." "There's more," Chen continued. "The incident with your sister has gone viral across 3 sectors. The Axorians are particularly disturbed, given their cultural views on the treatment of expectant mothers. Their ambassador has officially requested an investigation." Ta nodded. The Axorians considered all unborn children sacred. An attack on a pregnant woman was, to them, an attack on their entire belief system. "I'm not telling you how to handle your family matters, Ta," Admiral Chen said, her tone softening. "But remember that your actions reflect on the GDF. That said," she leaned closer to the screen, "if I were in your position, I'd make sure justice is served, properly served." "Understood, Admiral." After the call ended, Ta sat down at his desk and pulled up all the information he could find on Officer Derek Mason. 20 years on the force. 17 complaints of excessive force, all dismissed. 6 specifically against Black Korean citizens. Mason had never faced serious consequences. "That's about to change," Ta said to the empty room. The Peacekeeper entered Novaterra orbit at dawn, its massive hull gleaming in the first light of the colony's sun. On the ground, people pointed up at the sky, where the battleship was visible even in daylight. Officer Derek Mason saw it too, from the window of the police station. He had been called in early for a meeting with Police Chief Harris. "Mason, do you have any idea what you've done?" Chief Harris asked, pacing behind his desk. Mason shrugged. "I followed procedure. The woman was resisting." "Stop." Chief Harris slammed his hand on the desk. "Every angle of the incident is on video. There was no resistance. You assaulted a pregnant woman because she was recording you, which she had every right to do. Those Black Koreans are always—" "Shut up," Harris shouted. "Do you know who that woman is? She's Ji-Soo Kim, one of the most respected medical researchers on Novaterra. Her work has saved thousands of lives." Mason rolled his eyes. "So she has a good job. That doesn't put her above the law. Harris stared at Mason in disbelief. You're not getting it. That battleship up there. He pointed toward the window. That's the GDF Peacekeeper. Its captain is Ta Kim, the woman's brother. Mason's face paled slightly. So what? The military can't interfere with police business. The office door opened, and an aide rushed in. Chief, Captain Kim has landed. He's requested a meeting with the governor and the entire city council. He's brought Exorian representatives with him. Chief Harris closed his eyes briefly. Tell them we'll cooperate fully. He turned to Mason. You're suspended without pay, effective immediately. Turn in your badge and gun. Mason stood up angrily. You can't do this. The union will. The union has already issued a statement distancing themselves from you. Harris cut in. You're toxic, Mason. Nobody wants to be associated with the man who punched Captain Ta Kim's pregnant sister. Ta entered the hospital room quietly. Jisoo was awake, looking pale but smiling when she saw him. Minho stood and offered his hand. Brother, Jisoo said softly. Tai took her hand gently, mindful of the IV line. Little sister, I came as soon as I heard. You brought your ship, Jisoo said with a weak laugh. Always so dramatic. Ta smiled, but his eyes were serious. How are you? The baby. We're both stable, Jisoo assured him. The doctors say with rest, everything should be fine. Ta nodded, relief washing over his face. He turned to Minho. Would you give us a moment? After Minho left, Tai sat on the edge of the bed. I've already started an investigation. Mason has a history. This wasn't his first assault, just the first one caught on video from multiple angles. Jisoo nodded. I knew about his reputation. Everyone in our community does. We warn each other about him. Not anymore, Ta said firmly. I'm meeting with the governor and city council in 2 hours. The Exorian ambassador is with me. Jisoo's eyes widened. The Exorians? Ta, what are you planning? Justice, he said simply. The kind that changes things. The meeting room fell silent as Tai entered, dressed in his full GDF uniform with all his medals. Behind him came Ambassador Locks of Exoria, tall and dignified with iridescent blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the lights. Governor Wilson rose to greet them. Captain Kim, Ambassador, thank you for coming. Let me first express my deepest regrets about the incident involving your sister. Ta nodded but didn't smile. Governor, I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for action. Ambassador Locke stepped forward. The Exorian people have watched the attack on researcher Kim with horror. In our culture, one who brings harm to an expectant mother commits a crime against all future generations. The city council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tai placed a data drive on the table. This contains evidence of 23 similar incidents in the past 5 years, all involving Officer Mason, all buried or dismissed. The difference now is that the galaxy is watching. He turned on a screen, showing messages of support for Jisoo flooding in from across human colonies and alien worlds. The Galactic Council has opened an official inquiry, Ambassador Locke added. They wish to know if Novaterra upholds the Interspecies Rights Accord it signed 3 years ago. Governor Wilson paled. The accord was crucial for trade and diplomatic relations. What do you want us to do, Captain? What you should have done years ago, Tay replied. Full investigation, public hearing, and not just for Mason, but for everyone who protected him. All the complaints that were ignored, all the victims who never got justice. That would mean investigating half the police force, including some high-ranking officials. A council member protested. Yes, Ta said simply. It would. Ambassador Locke moved closer to the table. The Exorian government offers its resources to assist. We have experts in organizational reform who have helped other worlds address similar problems. And if we refuse? Another council member asked. Tay's expression hardened. Then I file a formal petition with the Galactic Council requesting they review Novaterra's colonial charter. I believe Section 12 allows for outside intervention when a colony fails to protect its citizens. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. Loss of local control, interstellar embarrassment, economic disaster. Governor Wilson cleared his throat. That won't be necessary, Captain. We'll launch a full investigation immediately, with complete transparency. Good, Ta nodded. Ambassador Locks will stay to observe the process, as will a GDF oversight team. As they left the meeting, Ambassador Locks spoke quietly to Ta. Your sister's research is known even on Axoria. Her work on cross-species medicine has saved many of our children. Jisoo has always wanted to help others, Tae replied. All she asked in return was to be treated with dignity. And now? The ambassador asked. Ta looked up at the sky, where his battleship hung like a silver star. Now we make sure what happened to her never happens to anyone else, on this world or any other. Across town, Officer Mason watched the news in growing fear as the announcer reported that galactic authorities were taking over the investigation. He had no idea that the woman he had struck was not just the sister of a war hero, but a respected scientist whose work had made her known across the stars. He was about to find out just how small this world had become. The courthouse of New Seoul stood tall in the morning light. People gathered outside, holding signs demanding justice. Some were human, others were clearly not. Blue-skinned Exorians, tall Viridians with their leaf-like hair, and other species from across the galaxy stood together with the people of Novaterra. Inside, Jisoo sat in the front row of the courtroom. Her belly had grown larger in the 3 months since the attack. Beside her, Minho held her hand. Taz sat on her other side, his uniform crisp and his face serious. Are you sure you want to be here? Minho asked Jisoo quietly. The doctor said to avoid stress. Jisoo nodded. I need to see this, for all of us who've been hurt by people like Mason. At the defense table, Officer Derek Mason sat with his lawyer, a thin man named Parker. Mason looked smaller somehow, without his uniform. He kept his eyes down, avoiding the stares of those in the courtroom. Judge Wilson entered, and everyone stood. She was an older woman with gray hair and a reputation for being fair but tough. Be seated, she said. We are here for the trial of Derek Mason, charged with assault of Jisoo Kim, abuse of power, and violation of civil rights. How does the defendant plead? Parker stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur ran through the crowd. Judge Wilson banged her gavel. Order. Mr. Reed, you may present the prosecution's case. Prosecutor Reed stood, a tall man with dark skin and a calm voice. Thank you, Your Honor. The evidence in this case is clear. We have video from multiple angles showing Officer Mason striking Ms. Kim, a pregnant woman who posed no threat. We have testimony from witnesses who saw the entire incident. We have records showing Officer Mason's history of similar behavior targeting specific groups. Parker jumped up. Objection. My client's past record is not relevant to this specific incident. Your Honor, Reed countered, the pattern of behavior establishes intent and motive. Judge Wilson considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Reed. The first witness called was Dr. Lana Park, Jisoo's doctor. Dr. Park, please tell the court about Ms. Kim's injuries, Reed requested. Dr. Park spoke clearly. Ms. Kim suffered a split lip requiring 5 stitches, facial bruising, and a minor placental abruption, a separation of the placenta from the uterine wall, caused by the fall. This posed a serious risk to both mother and child. And the long-term effects. Ms. Kim was placed on bed rest for 6 weeks. She has been unable to continue her important research. The psychological trauma has been significant. She experiences anxiety when encountering law enforcement officers. During cross-examination, Parker tried to suggest Jisoo's condition might have been caused by something else. Dr. Park firmly shut him down. The injuries were consistent with a punch to the face and subsequent fall, exactly as shown in the video evidence. The next witness was Hannah Lee, who had recorded one of the clearest videos of the incident. "Ms. Lee, why did you begin recording?" Reed asked. "I recognized Officer Mason from community warnings about him. When I saw him stop Ms. Kim, I knew there might be trouble. Our community shares information about which officers to be careful around." Parker objected again, but Judge Wilson overruled him. More witnesses followed, each telling the same story. Mason had been aggressive from the start. Jisoo had been polite and cooperative. The attack was unprovoked. During a break, Ta stepped outside to speak with Ambassador Locks, who had been observing the trial. "This is troubling," Locks said. "I've been monitoring communications between Defense Counsel Parker and several high-ranking officials. There are irregularities." Ta frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" "Evidence being suppressed. Witnesses being pressured. The judge has received threats." Ta's jaw tightened. "Can you prove this?" Locks nodded. "Axorian sensing abilities allow us to detect certain types of electronic communications. It's why we're valued as diplomats. We can provide proof, but not in a way your courts would accept. So justice might not be served, even with all this evidence," Ta said bitterly. "Perhaps Earth justice will fail," Locks replied. "But there are other forms of justice in the galaxy." When court resumed, the defense began their case. Parker called character witnesses who claimed Mason was a dedicated officer. He showed edited clips of the video that made it appear as if Jisoo had moved toward Mason first. "Objection," Reed shouted. "This is a manipulated version of the evidence." "Your Honor, this is simply an enhanced view of the same footage," Parker argued smoothly. Judge Wilson squinted at the screen. "I'll allow it, but the jury should see both versions." Ta leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Something was wrong. The judge had been fair until now, but suddenly she was allowing clearly altered evidence. When it was Mason's turn to testify, he put on a show of remorse mixed with self-defense. "I felt threatened," he claimed. "In my training, we're taught to respond to threats quickly. It was dark, and I thought I saw her reach for something in her bag." "That's a lie," Jisoo whispered to Ta. "It was still daylight, and my hands were empty." Ta nodded grimly. "I know." During cross-examination, Reed tried to challenge Mason's story. "The video clearly shows Ms. Kim had nothing in her hands except her phone, which she had a legal right to use to record the interaction. It looked different from my perspective," Mason insisted. Reed showed the unedited video again. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence Officer Mason's body camera footage as well." Parker jumped up. "Objection. That footage was ruled inadmissible in the pre-trial hearing due to technical issues." "Technical issues that conveniently erased the most damning evidence," Reed argued. Judge Wilson shook her head. "The body camera footage remains inadmissible." In the gallery, Ambassador Locks made a small gesture to Ta, confirming his suspicions. The system was broken. The trial lasted a week. When it came time for closing arguments, Reed made a passionate plea for justice. "The evidence is clear. Officer Mason abused his power and assaulted a pregnant woman who was exercising her legal rights. This isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern of behavior that has been ignored for too long. It's about whether our justice system works for everyone or just for some." Parker's closing was brief but effective. "My client made a split-second decision in what he perceived as a threatening situation. Police officers face difficult choices every day. They deserve our support, not our condemnation." The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the forewoman looked troubled. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Wilson asked. "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman replied. "On the charge of assault, we find the defendant not guilty due to reasonable doubt about threat perception." Gasps filled the courtroom. Jisoo closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "On the charge of abuse of power, we find the defendant not guilty." Todd put his arm around Jisoo, his face like stone. On the charge of civil rights violation, we find the defendant not guilty. Cheers erupted from Mason's supporters. Judge Wilson banged her gavel. Order in the court. When the noise died down, she continued, "The defendant is free to go. Case dismissed." Mason smiled as he shook Parker's hand. He turned to look at Jisoo, and for a moment, there was a flash of triumph in his eyes. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted. Protesters shouted in anger. News reporters pushed microphones toward anyone leaving the building. Jisoo, Tai, and Minho were escorted to a private exit by security. Ambassador Locke met them there. This outcome was expected, Locke said quietly, but not accepted. Ta nodded grimly. "What happens now?" "Now," Locke replied, "we take this to a higher court, the highest court." Jisoo looked confused. "The Supreme Court?" Locke smiled, a strange expression on his alien face. "No, Jisoo Kim, the Galactic Council. Your brother isn't the only one with power in this universe. Your work has saved many Exorian children. We consider you family. And in our culture, family does not stand alone." Ta's communication device beeped. He checked it, and his eyes widened slightly. "What is it?" Minho asked. "A message from the Viridian Embassy, and the Centauri Alliance, and 3 other species." Ta looked up. "They all want to file formal protests with the Galactic Council over today's verdict." Ambassador Locke nodded. "Officer Mason may think he has won, but he has no idea what forces he has set in motion. This is not over. It has barely begun." Across town, Mason celebrated his victory with friends. He had no idea that his name was now being discussed in chambers far beyond Earth by beings whose concept of justice spanned millennia, not election cycles. The local system had failed, but the galaxy was watching. The Galactic Council chamber was unlike anything on Earth. The vast room curved in a perfect circle, with seats for representatives from over 200 worlds. The walls shimmered with a material that changed colors based on the emotions in the room. Right now, they glowed a deep indigo, the color of shared outrage. Jisoo sat between Tai and Minho, feeling small in such a grand space. Her baby was due in just 2 weeks, and the journey to the Galactic Council station had been tiring. But she had insisted on being present. "Are you comfortable?" Tai asked, concerned. Jisoo nodded. "I'm fine. This is important." High Council Elder Vex, a centauri with silver skin and wise eyes, called the session to order. "We gather today to address a matter of interspecies justice, the case of Jisoo Kim of Earth Colony Novaterra." Ambassador Locke rose to speak first. "Honorable Council, 3 months ago, Jisoo Kim, a medical researcher of great importance to many worlds, was assaulted by a law enforcement officer while pregnant. Despite clear evidence, the Novaterra justice system failed to hold this officer accountable. Images of the assault played on large screens visible to all council members. Many flinched at the sight of Mason striking Jisoo. "Why does this concern the Galactic Council?" asked a representative from a distant world. Ambassador Locke gestured to Jisoo. "Researcher Kim's work crosses species boundaries. Her recent breakthrough in treating centauri birth complications has saved thousands of infants. Her current research focuses on a cure for the Viridian wasting disease, which threatens an entire generation of children." The Viridian representative stood. "When Officer Mason attacked researcher Kim, he didn't just harm one human. He endangered the future of many species who depend on her work." One by one, representatives from different worlds spoke about Jisoo's contributions to interspecies medicine. The walls of the chamber shifted to a deep purple, reflecting respect and gratitude. Governor Wilson of Novaterra looked increasingly uncomfortable as he sat with his delegation. Finally, he stood to speak. "The Council must understand that this is an internal Earth matter. While we regret the incident, our justice system has rendered its verdict. The Galactic Council has no jurisdiction over our local law enforcement." Elder Vex raised a hand. Governor Wilson, may I remind you that Novaterra signed the Interspecies Protection Accord 3 years ago. Section 12 specifically addresses threats to individuals whose work is vital to multiple species. This was a simple assault case, not an interspecies incident, Wilson argued. Ta stood. With respect, Governor, there was nothing simple about it. My sister's work affects billions across the galaxy, and the trial itself was compromised. At a nod from Elder Vex, Todd presented evidence that Ambassador Locke had gathered. Communications between Judge Wilson, Defense Attorney Parker, and several high officials showing a coordinated effort to ensure Mason's acquittal. The chamber walls flashed red with collective anger. This is outrageous, Governor Wilson protested. You have no right to spy on our communications. Ambassador Locke spoke calmly. We did not spy. Axorians naturally sense electronic communications nearby. It is a biological ability, not technology. These recordings were made legally under galactic law. Elder Vex studied the evidence. The Council finds this deeply troubling. Governor Wilson, did you know about this corruption? Wilson's face paled. I was aware of some concerns about the case. He knew, Jisoo said clearly. He was part of the group trying to protect Mason. Not because he cares about Mason, but because exposing him would expose the whole corrupt system. The Council fell silent. Then Elder Vex spoke. Under Article 7 of the Interspecies Protection Accord, the Council has authority to intervene when a signatory world fails to protect individuals vital to interspecies welfare. We will now vote. One by one, the representatives cast their votes. The result was nearly unanimous. Elder Vex announced, the Council finds that Novaterra has violated the Accord. We hereby establish oversight of Novaterra's law enforcement and judicial systems for a period of 5 years. Additionally, Officer Derek Mason is found guilty of assault under galactic law. What does that mean? Minho whispered to Ta. It means Mason faces galactic justice now, Tay replied. Derek Mason was enjoying his first day back on duty. The department had quietly reinstated him after the media attention died down. He sat in his cruiser, feeling invincible. The system had protected him, just as it always had. His cruiser computer beeped with an incoming message. Mason frowned. It wasn't using the standard police codes. The screen flickered, and an image appeared, the official seal of the Galactic Council. Derek Mason, the voice stated. By order of the Galactic Council, your Earth citizenship privileges have been modified. Your law enforcement authorization is permanently revoked. Your right to serve in any position of authority over others is suspended. Mason stared at the screen in shock. What the hell is this? Some kind of joke. The voice continued. You are required to report to the Novaterra Interspecies Embassy within 24 hours for processing. Failure to comply will result in further restrictions. The cruiser door suddenly opened. Chief Harris stood there, looking grim. Out of the vehicle, Mason. Now. Chief, there's been some mistake. Some alien message just. No mistake, Harris interrupted. The Galactic Council has spoken. I've got representatives from 3 species waiting in my office. Your badge. Your gun. Now. Mason's world began to crumble around him. 6 weeks later, Jisoo sat in the garden of her home, holding her newborn daughter. The baby, named Hope, had her mother's eyes and a peaceful smile. Minho sat beside them, watching his daughter with wonder. She's perfect, Jisoo. Yes, she is, Jisoo agreed, gently touching the baby's cheek. A shadow fell across them as Tai approached. He was out of uniform, dressed in civilian clothes. Uncle Tai is here, Jisoo said to the baby, who blinked up at the tall man now kneeling beside them. She's beautiful, Ta said softly. He offered his finger, and the tiny hand wrapped around it. Strong grip. She'll be a fighter like her mother. Any news? Minho asked. Ta nodded. The Galactic Oversight Team has removed 7 judges and 12 senior police officials. Governor Wilson has resigned. The new leadership is working with Ambassador Locke to implement reforms. And Mason? Jisoo asked. Working community service at the Interspecies Medical Center, Tae replied, under Axorian supervision. They're very thorough in their rehabilitation methods. He'll spend the next 5 years learning exactly how his actions affect others. Jisoo nodded, satisfied. Not prison, but justice. The Viridian ambassador sent a message, Ta continued. They've named a research fellowship after you. The Kim Initiative will fund 50 scientists working on cross-species medicine. Jisoo's eyes filled with tears. That means more than any punishment for Mason ever could. The universe works in strange ways, Minho observed. One man's hatred led to a galaxy coming together. They sat in peaceful silence for a moment, until the baby made a small sound. I have some news too, Ta said, smiling. I've been offered a new position. The GDF is creating an interspecies training academy. They want me to lead it. You're leaving the Peacekeeper? Jisoo asked, surprised. Ta nodded. It's time. The academy will train officers from all species to work together, to understand each other's cultures and values, to prevent what happened to you from happening to anyone else. Where will it be located? Minho asked. Tae grinned. Right here on Novaterra. The Galactic Council thought it would be appropriate. Jisoo laughed softly. Perfect. Hope will grow up with students from across the galaxy. Speaking of hope, Ta said, suddenly serious, the Council had a question for you. They've never had a human child named as a peace symbol before. Jisoo and Minho exchanged surprised looks. What does that mean? Jisoo asked. It means hope would be recognized throughout the galaxy as a symbol of what we can achieve together. Her story would be taught to children on hundreds of worlds. With your permission, of course. Jisoo looked down at her daughter. Will it put her in danger? Ta shook his head. The opposite. It means she'll have the protection of every member world of the Council. No one would dare harm the peace symbol. Minho reached over to take Jisoo's hand. It's your choice, love. Jisoo thought of the long journey that had brought them here. A moment of hatred had led to a galaxy of support. One man's cruelty had exposed a broken system and created the opportunity to build something better. Yes, she said finally. Hope can be their symbol, but first and always, she's our daughter. Ta nodded. I'll inform the Council. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Jisoo thought of Officer Mason. He had never known who her brother was. He had never known who she was. Most importantly, he had never understood that in a connected galaxy, no one stands alone. Justice had come, not from revenge, but from unity. Not from punishment, but from change. In her arms, Hope slept peacefully, unaware that her story had just begun. A story that would spread across the stars, teaching a simple but powerful truth. In the vastness of space, it is not our differences that define us, but how we stand together when those differences are threatened. And somewhere in the galaxy, a young officer would think twice before acting out of hatred, knowing that the consequences could reach farther than they ever imagined.